I remember sitting across from a therapist and realizing that she'd already decided what was wrong with me. I'd walked into the room carrying anger, grief, fear, and the shock of becoming a 45-year-old man with heart failure. She seemed determined to hand me depression instead. That conversation became the beginning of a much longer search for therapy that could hear what I was actually saying. I'm Tate, and this is A Body Rebels, a chronic illness podcast. What I share here comes from my personal experience. It isn't medical advice, and it isn't a reason to diagnose or treat yourself. Please don't start medication, stop medication, change treatment, adjust oxygen, alter your diet, or make medical decisions because of something I say. Talk with your own doctor or another qualified medical professional, because my medical chart should never become anyone else's instruction manual. I choose to have an AI voice narrate these episodes because my own voice gets tired easily and can eventually sound like a cassette player slowly chewing the tape. The writing, memories, feelings, perspective, and lived experience are mine. The AI voice gives me accessibility, consistency, and listenability while allowing me to keep telling these stories without exhausting my own voice and body. Today I'm talking about the difference between being depressed and being furious, and about what happened when I finally found therapy that understood the difference. When I first began writing publicly about sarcoidosis, people would contact me and ask how I handled my depression. They didn't ask whether I was depressed. They assumed I was. The question was usually well-intentioned. Someone had read that chronic illness and depression can occur together, which they certainly can. Serious illness can affect almost every part of a person's emotional life. Pain, isolation, disability, financial stress, uncertainty, medication side effects, and the loss of a familiar future can all contribute to depression. But chronic illness doesn't automatically cause depression in every person. I wasn't depressed. I knew sadness, fear, and grief. I knew what it felt like to stare at my own life and barely recognize its shape. What I carried most heavily was anger. I was 45 years old when heart failure entered my life. When I searched for support and tried to find people whose experiences resembled mine, most of the people I encountered were decades older. I'd listen to conversations about heart failure and feel as though somebody had moved me from 45 to 85 without letting the rest of me catch up. My body had been reassigned to another age group. I hadn't asked for the transfer. I was angry about the illness. I was angry about everything it had taken. I was angry about what might still be coming. I was angry that other people could walk through an ordinary day without calculating whether their heart, lungs, energy, or medication schedule would cooperate. Some of that anger pointed outward. A great deal of it pointed directly at me. I searched my past for evidence that I'd caused what was happening. I replayed choices and questioned whether I'd failed to protect my body from something I couldn't have predicted or controlled. Then my Catholic upbringing would quietly pull up a chair, straighten its collar, and open a fresh folder. Catholic guilt doesn't always knock. Sometimes it arrives early and brings paperwork. I didn't need someone to tell me I was cheerful. I wasn't. I needed help understanding why anger had become the main electrical current running through me. So I decided to try therapy. I found a psychologist near my home. The practice had good reviews, and everything looked respectable and professional. I assumed I'd go in, explain what had happened to my health, and begin sorting through the emotional wreckage. Instead, I felt as though I'd entered a clinical interview, where the conclusion had already been typed. The therapist wasn't warm. I didn't feel invited into a conversation. I felt evaluated. She kept returning to depression and medication. I kept saying that depression didn't describe what I was experiencing. I knew I wasn't doing well. I wasn't pretending that illness had left me emotionally untouched, but I could feel a difference between depression and the mixture of grief, fear, resentment, and rage that had gathered inside me. My own description of my mind seemed to carry less authority than the label she preferred. That frightened me more than it helped me. I began questioning whether therapy required surrendering my understanding of myself at the door. I wondered whether the only acceptable answer was the one the therapist had already selected. So I stopped going. Some people may hear that and decide, I was in denial. They may think the therapist recognized something I couldn't recognize in myself. That can happen. Mental health conditions may affect insight, and a trained professional may notice patterns that a patient hasn't identified. But therapy also depends on trust. I didn't trust her. I didn't feel understood, and I didn't feel that my words were being examined with curiosity. I felt that they were being redirected toward a diagnosis that didn't fit. Walking away from that therapist didn't mean therapy itself had failed. It meant that particular relationship had failed. After I stepped away, several years passed. Then one day, I came across an article about Buddhist psychotherapy. I didn't know much about it, but the approach caught my attention because it combined clinical psychology with Buddhist teachings, mindfulness, and deeper self-examination. It didn't seem focused only on identifying symptoms and assigning them a category. It offered another way to look inward. I found a therapist who practiced that way, and the experience was entirely different. She didn't discard psychology. She added another language to it. We could talk about thoughts and behavior, but we could also talk about attachment, suffering, compassion, awareness, and the stories I was telling myself about what illness meant. I wasn't forced into a spiritual identity. I didn't need to become Buddhist or pretend I held beliefs that weren't mine. The approach simply gave me more doors to open. One practice was learning to notice an emotion before immediately becoming tangled inside it. If resentment appeared, I could pause and name it. There's resentment. Then I could notice where it sat in my body, tightness in my chest, a clenched jaw, a restless feeling in my hands. I didn't have to approve of the emotion or chase it out of the room. I could observe it long enough to ask what was underneath it. That small pause created room between the feeling and whatever I did next. The therapy helped me look beneath the anger, rather than treating anger as the entire problem. Under it, I found grief. I found fear. I found humiliation. I found the shock of watching my body become unreliable. I found resentment toward people who still moved easily through the world. I found the part of me that believed illness had reduced my value. I also found how quickly I judged myself whenever my body failed to behave. Unfortunately, circumstances changed, and continuing with that therapist became impractical. Her practice model changed, and seeing her was no longer convenient. I lost access to an approach that had helped me, but I didn't lose what I discovered through it. Years later, after my mother died, I tried therapy again. This time I worked with a psychotherapist who was also a shamanic practitioner. The word shamanic may make some people curious and cause others to reach quietly for the nearest exit. I understand both reactions. Her work included meditation, visualization, guided inward reflection, and exercises in self-discovery. I wasn't lying on the floor while someone waved feathers over my insurance card. It was still therapy. It simply used methods that matched how I make sense of my inner life. I don't follow one particular religion. I consider myself spiritual, and I find wisdom in many traditions without feeling the need to sign a lifelong contract with one of them. This therapist's approach allowed me to examine more than my reaction to illness. We worked through anger connected to my health, but we also reached backward into childhood, old resentment, guilt, self-loathing, and parts of my past that had remained remarkably well preserved. Some old pain has excellent storage conditions. One exercise involved picturing a younger version of myself during a difficult memory. Instead of judging him from the distance of adulthood, I was asked to notice what he needed and what he hadn't received. That wasn't easy. My first instinct was to criticize him, which told me quite a bit about how long self-judgment had been running the place. Illness gave fresh fuel to that old habit. I treated every limitation as evidence against myself. Needing help felt like failure. Fatigue felt like weakness. Frightening the people who loved me felt like something I should apologize for. I expected myself to manage serious illness with the quiet dignity of someone in a tasteful medical drama. Real illness rarely comes with flattering lighting. Therapy helped me question those accusations. My body becoming ill wasn't a moral failure. Heart failure wasn't proof that I'd failed at being a person. Sarcoidosis wasn't punishment. I've lived with sarcoidosis for 20 years. I still have heart failure. I still have serious lung disease. I still have a vestibular schwannoma, a benign brain tumor that doesn't contribute toward the mortgage. Therapy didn't remove any of those things. It didn't heal my organs or return me to the body I had before illness. It changed the way I spoke to myself while living inside this body. I became less angry at the world for continuing without consulting me. I became less angry at myself for not being able to overpower disease through discipline, goodness, work, prayer, positive thinking, or exceptionally organized grocery lists. I'm not claiming that I've reached some permanent state of peace. I still get angry. I still have days when I resent what chronic illness requires. I still catch myself bargaining with limitations that have shown no interest in negotiation. But anger no longer controls the whole conversation. I can recognize it, examine it, and ask what it's protecting. Sometimes it's protecting fear. Sometimes it's covering grief. Sometimes I'm simply exhausted and irritated because getting dressed has required the strategic planning of a minor military operation. Not every emotion needs a diagnosis. Some emotions need attention. Some need rest. Some need time. Some need professional help. Some need validation from someone who understands that the physical reality behind them is real. Some need a place where I can say the impolite version out loud without worrying that I'm upsetting my family. I'm fortunate to have a wife I can talk to about almost anything. The difficulty is getting me to start talking. I'm not naturally gifted at emotional excavation. My wife often has to ask questions, wait through the silence, ask again, and keep gently pulling until I finally produce the sentence I've been carrying around for 3 weeks. A therapist offers a different kind of space. Sometimes speaking to a stranger is easier because I don't have to protect that person from my pain. I don't have to worry that my fear will keep them awake. I can bring the ugly, repetitive, contradictory thoughts into the room and let them exist long enough to be understood. Therapy doesn't have to focus directly on illness either. Chronic illness can strain marriages, friendships, family relationships, work, identity, finances, and trust. The condition may be medical, but the pressure spreads into places no scan can photograph. A person might need help dealing with relatives who don't believe them. Another person might be grieving lost independence. Someone else might be terrified of becoming a burden. Another might be depressed and need treatment for depression. And someone like me might arrive carrying enough anger to power a small municipal building. The challenge is finding the right therapist and the right approach. A traditional clinical therapist may be exactly what some people need. Someone else may feel more comfortable with a therapist who understands their cultural background, religious beliefs, spiritual practices, sexuality, disability, or experience with chronic illness. A Catholic might feel safest with a therapist who can respectfully include Catholic teaching. A Buddhist may want mindfulness to be part of the work. A person with no spiritual beliefs may prefer an entirely evidence-based clinical approach without religious language. None of those choices is automatically better. The useful questions are whether I can speak freely and whether the therapist listens closely enough to understand what I'm actually saying. Access has changed since my earliest experiences with therapy. Online sessions now make it possible to work with someone who isn't located nearby. That can widen the choices for people who are homebound, immunosuppressed, unable to drive, limited by fatigue, or living in an area with few mental health professionals. Cost can still be a serious barrier, and not every therapist accepts insurance. Some practices offer sliding scale fees, community programs, support groups, or lower-cost virtual options. Finding them can take persistence, which is particularly annoying when persistence is already being spent on surviving the week. Still, I don't regret continuing to search. The first therapist wasn't right for me. The later therapists helped me understand myself in ways I hadn't expected. They didn't make me perfect. They didn't make me endlessly calm, spiritually polished, or delighted with every development in my medical record. They helped me stop treating myself as the person responsible for every terrible thing that happened to me. That changed how I lived with what couldn't be changed. Anyone considering therapy deserves a therapist who makes room for their actual experience. Not every chronically ill person is depressed. Some are. Some are grieving. Some are frightened, furious, lonely, overwhelmed, or carrying several of those feelings at once. The label should follow the person. The person shouldn't have to reshape their experience to satisfy the label. I'm Tate, and you've been listening to A Body Rebels, a chronic illness podcast. I'm grateful you spent this time with me. You can visit abodyrebels.com to leave a review, send me a message, or leave a voicemail for the show. I read and listen to what comes in. I'm not able to respond to solicitations, sales offers, guest pitches, or promotional outreach. That boundary keeps the door open for listeners without allowing the inbox to become a digital flea market. But for those of you who are here for the journey, please follow the show, share an episode with someone who may need it, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday and Friday. You can also support the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, or FSR, at stopsarcoidosis.org. A link will be in the show notes. Research, education, advocacy, and patient support all require resources, and any donation you're able to make helps that work continue. One small pronunciation request before I sign off. The word is sarcoidosis, not sarcoidosis. The middle sounds like koi, as in koi fish. After 20 years of living with this disease, the mispronunciation has become a minor pet peeve. I'm not going to leap out from behind a shrub and correct anyone, but somewhere in my imagination, a koi fish is shaking its head. Until next time, be gentle with yourself, keep breathing, and remember, sarcoidosis is only rare until you're the one living with it.